Public housing projects raised a generation of Americans. My grandmother tells me about her childhood in a New York City project. She has fond memories of playing with the groups of children left at home while the mothers worked, about eating government cheese. She also has memories of social workers going from door to door, checking to see who was living there, and about her closest friend's family being denied an apartment elsewhere because they were black. My grandmother still lives in public housing. Like many Americans, public housing is not just one option, it's the only option. Today, America has a public housing problem, and just building more of the same buildings won't make it go away. That's not to say we shouldn't be building lots of housing right now. Currently, America faces a nearly 4 million unit shortage of affordable housing. Applicants are left languishing on waiting lists, many living in unsafe conditions and thousands dying before they are even granted a spot. Housing choice voucher programs try to fill the gap by subsidizing the rent in regular apartments. Despite this, both housing projects and voucher programs around the nation are overwhelmed, and many waiting lists are closed. 4 million people in the world's most developed country don't deserve to be homeless or to be forced to spend money for their healthcare, food, and education on unaffordable housing. The rental market is not expanding anytime soon, so the choice for America should be to build more. Signed into law under Bill Clinton in 1999, the Faircloth Amendment puts a cap on the volume of public housing projects built in the nation. Touted as a measure to ensure demolished projects be replaced, it has instead been the nail in the coffin for expanding public housing for over 2 decades now. Repealing the Faircloth Amendment would be an easy win for housing in America. However, our problems run deeper. An uncomfortable truth that no one wants to discuss is what it's like to live in public housing projects. The housing policy choices that purport to make housing fair also make it crushingly lonely and prevent residents from building community. In order to address the housing crisis, we need to think beyond just building bigger and faster, and instead look at how to build housing better. America's approach to public housing places it as a resource of last resort. It's positioned as a temporary measure, with the expectation that soon public housing residents will pull themselves up by the bootstraps, find a high-paying job, and afford regular housing. Many requirements are razor-thin and can disqualify you the moment you meet them. The disparity between public and private housing in many cities leaves no attainable middle ground. People are forced to make a choice, take the difficult leap to a higher income and try to stay afloat, with the majority of their money now going to rent, or continue to stay beneath the poverty line, but have the security of a roof over their heads. Disability and a competitive job market can make this leap all but impossible to consider. Public housing policies split families apart. Pruitt-Igoe, one of America's most infamous public housing projects, instituted policies which prevented working fathers from living with families. Social workers would routinely spy on residents to make sure they weren't hiding unaccounted for family members, creating an air of fear and surveillance. There was no funding for renovations or repairs beyond rent, and soon most utilities fell into disrepair. Conditions in Pruitt-Igoe caused such distress and detriment to its residents that it became inhospitable 20 years later and was demolished. The trauma these families faced was severe. Children grew up under constant pressure to maintain an unmaintainable image, without outside help, and with constant suspicion from their surrounding community. Despite all of this, the stories of Pruitt-Igoe hold glimmers of hope for the future of public housing. In interviews of those who grew up in Pruitt-Igoe, many spoke about how fondly they remember what community they had, about watching windows lit up with Christmas lights in the winter. With adequate resources, that spirit of community could have flourished. The image of Pruitt-Igoe's decay and demolition took hold, and fear of housing projects spread across America. An overbearing police presence became the norm within housing projects. Hotspot policing tactics and the HUD's 1996 drug elimination program disproportionately placed law enforcement in and around public housing communities. Stop and frisk policies increased evictions for minor drug crimes and dampened civic participation, while widening distrust and fear in communities. Widespread surveillance and community separation erase the close neighborhood bonds and support network so often seen in wealthier communities. So many of these requirements, checks, and social pressures form a racial and economic barrier to housing that furthers the criminalization and incarceration cycle in America. They also have a deeply detrimental effect on the psychological health of America's lower class. We are using housing as yet another carrot on a stick, not to help, but to continually punish and separate the poor for their lack of resources. The unwillingness to place trust in the residents of public housing and the design practices of physical isolation from surrounding towns and cities cast residents further from society. Often projects can feel like another way of removing undesirables from view, short of incarceration. Contrast this attitude with that of Singapore, where as of 2021, 81% of its residents live in public housing. Part of this equation is the quality of housing being built. Public housing in Singapore is vibrant, colorful, and well integrated in the hearts of its lively city centers. Residents report a 90% satisfaction rate for their apartment units in comfort and quality. Another large part of their success falls on reducing barriers to entry and robust community building. Singapore's public housing is built alongside its own schools, grocery stores, parks, hospitals, gyms, and malls. Public transit is close and easily available. The buildings are not uniform in height and blend into the city around them. Apartments come in varieties of size and even include privately built but publicly subsidized executive suites. All prices are set based on income, and residents maintain a form of ownership that even allows their family to inherit apartments. Apartments of different sizes are carefully placed adjacently to promote association across family and class barriers. The extent of government oversight in Singapore is vast and completely unlike America. That doesn't mean that we can't mirror some of Singapore's success. New projects could be built to similar quality standards and become part of the city landscape, not walled outcasts. By decreasing excessive policing, funding could be diverted to services that uplift the community, like schools, hospitals, parks, and grocery stores. Housing should be available to a wide range of economic backgrounds, with rent based on a reasonable percentage of income. This allows freedom of mobility, but also provides more rent for the project as a whole, better supporting maintenance costs. Housing projects fail because they are cut off from the social and economic veins of their cities. Making housing projects a resource to everyone is not just a nice to have, but in fact is crucial for their survival. Reducing barriers for anyone to obtain housing has been shown to reduce poverty and social stratification. Accessible and decriminalized housing builds tight bonds that allow for communities to care for themselves and develop the space they live in. Cities that not just survive but thrive put housing on a level playing field for all their residents. The future of housing should not be offered with a laundry list of stipulations. Instead, housing should be built as part of the community, for anyone in the community, without policing tactics or class warfare that crushed the lives of so many living in housing projects of the past.